Hi, Augustine. It's nice to meet you finally. I've
You
heard a lot
too.
about you. We've never actually met, so it's nice. Thanks for being part of this. I've got to remember the name of it again now. Black and Queer Identities, back Theology series number 2. So
Yes.
thank you very much for coming along. You're the second one after Savvy Hensman, who we had on last week. So,
Oh well, that's hard to follow up. That's very hard to follow up.
So you've heard of Savvy then?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah. She used to be a trustee of ours as well. So
Oh, great.
before my time, but yeah. So Augustine, I've sent you some questions. We're gonna get going on the questions, but I wonder if you could maybe just first of all just introduce yourself a bit, let us know a little bit about your background, your kind of how you've got where you are today and developed your thought and all of that. As long as you
absolutely.
like, and then we can move on to other questions if we have time. See how we go.
Thank you so much, Ruth, and thank you for Inclusive Church for doing this. I really appreciate it. I'm my whole name is Cornel Augustine Tanner-Ihm, and I am a curate, assistant curate in the Church of England and Diocese of Manchester at St. James in Emmanuel and Didsbury. It's been quite interesting. I grew up as Joe's Witness, so no holidays, no birthdays, no fun.
Zero.
Grew up. Yeah, exactly. I grew up as Joe's Witness and in an impoverished community in Southwest Chicago. My family moved from Chicago to kind of like a suburb of Chicago, kind of rural suburbish place. And at 14, my friend, who was incredibly depressed, was going through mental institutions, in and out of mental institutions. And his mom said, can you, I remember asking, as a young person, say, what can I do to help my friend Mark? And his mom said, go to church with him. And I said, I do not want to do that. I have my own religion. But I went to church with him because I was like, it's something I can do to help. And there I met Jesus. I met the person of Jesus. And it was a Assemblies of God. It's a Pentecostal expression. And I was like, this is amazing. That same summer, I realized that at the time I would have said same-sex attracted. And that was really scary to me because my secular culture, my religious background, whether Jehovah's Witness or Pentecostalism, as well as my race, my African-American, Black African diaspora experience this is all wrong. Right. So if Republicans and Democrats can agree with something, I'm like, it must be somewhat bad. So that was really a huge part of my queer identity and my Christian identity very much merging. And then I went off to university, went to a very conservative institution. And I just started asking questions. Through that asking a lot of questions, I really found the Anglican expression the best for me. Mm-hmm. And it was so I started going to an Episcopal church. I always say that I was on the road to Rome, but I only had enough money to Canterbury. So so that's kind of where I went. And then I moved to the UK in 2013 and been serving in different churches ever since. So was a little bit of missionary between that time as well in Africa, but that's kind of where I am. And I trained at Durham, and now I'm doing a PhD back in the States, distance learning, and it's been a crazy ride. So that's a little bit about my story.
And what is your PhD in?
So my PhD is in actually interesting organizational psychology and practical theology. So so it's quite interesting. Yeah.
And why are you doing that in the States rather than here? Is there a reason for it?
Yeah, 2 reasons. I really like the way in which the practical element of the States, they do their doctorate programs, as well as I got scholarships.
Okay.
If I'm being brutally honest with you, part of my story, January 2021, I didn't have a place to live, didn't know what to do. I'm like, what do I do? Can't, with jobs and stuff. So I was like, I feel like I need something. I need some kind of motivation. So I kind of applied. I remember the insurrection in the United States. It was January 6th, 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being like, I'm applying for a PhD program. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to put tons of effort into it. I'm just going to work on it for a day, send it off. And within 5 days, I got accepted. So I was like, okay, well, maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. So that's kind of what happened. I knew I wanted to do a PhD, do further study anyway. So I was just like, well, I have time, so I'll do it. So now doing that and being a curate is quite funny, but yeah.
And were you planning on just doing the PhD and going back to America, or doing it from here, or before you got the curacy, what were you planning on doing with that?
Yeah, so I think I still wasn't, I looked for a curacy for over a year, and I was like, nothing's happening. So I decided, I'm gonna do this, this doctorate. As well as for me, it was really, really important to do be at an institution that there were Black and brown professors. And I knew that if I stayed in the UK, that was not going to be possible. So there's all the Black theology professors you can count on two hands in the UK. So I was like, actually, for my undergrad and master's, and even my ministerial training, every single person that I was taught by was white. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I was like, actually, I really want someone who looks like me to teach me. So and so far, all my modules for my doctorate has been actually all Black people. So it's been quite interesting. So yeah.
And which college is that? Which university?
It's called Bakke Graduate University in Dallas, Texas.
Okay, that's great. And tell us a little bit more, because you've mentioned it briefly just now. And of course, I do remember that whole, I think it was all on Twitter for a while, wasn't it? The fact that you were looking for this curacy and that you were really struggling. Can you tell us a little bit more about why that was? Because I think it relates to our theme, actually.
Absolutely. I think that I applied to curacies around the country. The North was definitely not giving back to me. So I was like, I'll just go South, even though I really wanted to be in the North. I applied for a church in St. Albans Diocese, so Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire, and I was there, and I applied for it. Thought it was a really good place for me to be a curate, and they wrote to me back and said, we don't want to further a conversation because this is a white, monochrome, working class parish, and we don't think you would feel very comfortable here. So I held on to that, and I remember sending it to a couple of friends. Some of my friends said, oh, I think you're overreacting. It's not that big of a deal. But then some of my friends, some of my older friends, kind of mentor people, were like, no, this is bad. So I remember telling my college, and my college was very much like, it's not that big of a deal. You're making too big of a deal of it. So I held on to it, and then when the Church of England, when everyone was starting to get on taking one knee for racism, it was really quite upsetting me, because I'm like, look at me, I have no, it's a pandemic, I have no job and stuff like that. And I just put a post out. To be honest, not really thinking, Ruth, that much was going to happen, if I'm honest. I was like, I just need to get that out there. And it kind of blew up quite big. The response from the church was quite terrible. It was, we're really sorry you felt hurt, which is obviously we know is not a real apology. So yeah, and that's kind of where it kind of all bubbled up and came from. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, an apology really is an acceptance of fault, isn't it? Not a kind of sorry that you felt some way. Because you can put any feeling on the other person and make it sound like they could be feeling it, and you might think it's irrational, which is the way out of an apology, really, isn't it? So
yeah, and it's interesting because one thing is really interesting. People, so the story of race in the church and in wider society is something I've been really quite passionate about for a long time. It wasn't just like some fad with Black Lives Matter, but it's been something that's been really passionate. My undergrad dissertation was on racial reconciliation as mission within the Anglican Communion. So I mean, I went to New Zealand, went to Australia to look at what churches were doing to reconcile with their colonial past, and what does reconciliation look like. So this is what I've been doing. You know what I mean? So people are like, oh, isn't this kind of cool? I'm like, no, this is cool, but I've been doing this stuff before the church realized we need to talk about this stuff. So yeah, so it was really quite fascinating, the way that the identities worked out. And if I'm honest, because I come from a more evangelical background, in some ways my queer identity had to like kind of be pushed down, and in that whole process of looking for curacies, and I was expected to be rejected for my queerness, but not expected to be rejected for my Blackness.
Really interesting.
And if I'm honest, at the beginning with the press, I was very, 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 I wouldn't say closeted, but I was very sheepish to talk about my queerness. Because was that probably an element of not getting curacies? Without a doubt. But people were a little less likely to say that direct. So
yeah, and even the response that they gave, I think part of the problem is not realizing that there's a problem with some people, you know, inside and outside of the church. So for me, it rings bells with, for example, when disabled people are told in jobs, not just in the church, but in jobs, and I've heard of several examples of this, that decisions have been made because people think that they can't do certain things, and they've never been asked. You know, this is a similar thing for me. You know, you've never been actually directly asked whether you are comfortable in that setting. They've just assumed it, which is the real problem, but they don't think it's a problem because they think somehow they're protecting you or something, but they're not giving you the opportunity. You know, they could say, well, you know, are you comfortable? The best thing I think with all of these issues of discrimination and inclusion is to ask the people themselves.
Yeah, and you know what, I don't like the idea of saying optimistic or pessimistic, but I am a prisoner of hope. Well, my favorite you know, theologian, historian is Cornel West, and he always says he's a prisoner of hope. And that's kind of what I try to be, a prisoner of hope. And my hope is that I think that people are unconsciously doing these things, but not, especially in the UK, not directly trying to be discriminatory. So an example is, you know, for my own fault, one of the things I did when I first came to the UK, I was on a panel to employ someone. Now, I'm confessing, Ruth, so I know this is wrong. This is my mistake. We were a round table looking for someone, and this person, she's been married for about 3 years. She's in her late 20s. In order to do this job, the strategic job that we had, the person needed to really be there for at least 5 to 7 years to implement some of these things. And when we were discussing, and you're probably guessing what I'm about to say, we're discussing about what's going happening. And I said to the interview people, I said, well, should we employ her, because she's probably going to want to have children soon. And then she would take on maternity leave, someone else would come in, and it would kind of mess up the whole flow. And the committee goes, Augustine, that's discriminatory. You're saying we should not hire her because she's a woman from a certain age. That's discriminatory. And we're going to have to ask you to not be on the committee anymore. And the thing is, because, and part of that was my own cultural background, that people do that all the time in the US.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my word. That was unconscious or conscious bias, massively. And that's super discriminatory. I was discriminating because of age. I was discriminating her because of her gender and sex. And that's just wrong. And so I think that sometimes a lot of people just do it because they just literally don't know. There was
people do that all the time, by the way, in jobs, but they don't say it openly.
Okay.
They just don't
Okay.
employ women because of those reasons of a certain age, and then they just make up some other reason. Yeah, it
Okay.
happens a lot.
My problem is I'm too
And
American.
actually, do you know what? The country that's actually, and I know you know about this country as well because you've lived there. The country that seems to have got rid of that the most is Sweden, and why? Because they have shared parental leave that is obligatory. So if the man doesn't take it, the woman doesn't get it in a opposite sex relationship. So what they've got then is that you can't be discriminated against, because then men also would be discriminated against. Then you'd just be discriminating against everyone that's within childbearing or being with a woman. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just would be ridiculous. So that's how to get rid of it, is to have more equality. Anyway, yeah. But that's an interesting story for sure, and it just shows that we've all got these. I don't want to use the term blind spot because that's probably not the best of terms, but things that we don't see, things that we miss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another thing I said, even what you said right now, I am learning to be more inclusive and learning to because I believe that we serve an inclusive God. And like, I remember I said something, I used a term like, I'm not a leopard. And I remember someone saying, there's still people that have leprosy that are outcasts. And I was like, Ruth, I was like, what? And I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. Or even like idea of blind spot, like, okay, how do we use a different one? Or and I'm trying to think of like even like, okay, so I was once blind but now I see, the hymn, like what, like, and obviously I know there's alternatives to that song, but it's like, oh man, I'm learning about all these different things, and it's coming to the conversation about how do we do things to be more inclusive. And for me, it comes from not to be PC like the world, but to be a church that honors and loves the people of God. Mm-hmm. So I'm preaching. Yeah.
To see that of God in everyone. Exactly. That's exactly what motivates me as well. Yeah. People think it's to do with like, you get kind of thrown these words at you like, oh, you're so woke, or oh, you're so PC. I feel like woke is the new PC. Like, that's the thing that everyone throws at you. But actually what it is that you want to respect and love and care for all people, and therefore you want to listen to them. And it doesn't mean that you're not doing it to annoy white people or something. You're just doing it because you care about marginalized people of all descriptions. And it is really hard. Like, I think that it is acceptable to be on a learning journey. All of us are, it's acceptable to do things wrong and to get things wrong, and to say, I don't know, things that come first to your head and then go, oh, actually, that's not a great phrase. Like, blind spot just comes to my head. It's very hard for us when we have had things ingrained and ways of talking that have just been repeated over and over and over again, to then change that language. And actually, I feel like language is even harder because it doesn't come, alternative phrases don't come very easily, and they don't come to our mind very quickly. And so we're just there going, blank. I've got a blank. I can't think of anything else to say. So I think those kinds of things, they take repetition. They take actually like relearning a lot of stuff. Yeah.
No,
and
absolutely.
In some ways, language is harder than attitudes, I think, because attitudes you can get into your head. I feel like, yeah, this is true about these people or whatever. You can almost change that attitude. Anyway, I don't know, but I feel like language is really, really difficult because you've just learnt it, and it's, yeah. Anyway, what were you going to say? Sorry. Is it Augustine or how do you pronounce your name? Sorry.
Augustine.
Augustine. Okay. I want to say it like the theologian Augustine. That's how we say the theologian.
That's what I remember. So what's interesting about the word woke is it comes from African American Vernacular English, AAVE. And woke, African American Vernacular English, obviously comes from the spiritual nature of African American heritage. So African American heritage is deeply embodied within the Christian religion. And we see throughout scripture about Christ and, God of the Old Testament, telling people to wake up. So wake up is woke. So that wokeness is actually a Christian phrase that sometimes more right-wing people have changed to be like this liberal, like this politically correct thing. But actually, the historical ancient understanding of wokeness is to be with the children of God. And I think that's really quite fascinating, to be that wokeness is about honoring people for who God has created them to be. So that was just a random interesting thing.
No, you're right. And, I think people get hung up on kind of taking sides on things, and they forget that there's a reason why we want to do this. It's not some kind of war or whatever they want to call it, a culture war or whatever. It's not because of a culture war. It's because we want to see that of God in everyone, and we want to honor that of God in everyone. And I even came across some Christians the other day that I thought were kind of progressive Christians, and they told me they had a problem with the word justice, and I was like, hang on a minute. Justice is a biblical word. It's a biblical imperative. It's throughout the Old Testament and the New. I mean, so if we've got a problem with the word justice, no wonder we've got a problem with the word woke. Yeah. Anyway.
Absolutely.
So moving to the next question. I've got this question here. What is your experience of being a queer Black person in the UK and the church? Now, you've answered it a little bit, haven't you, already? But is there anything that you want to add to that?
A couple of things. One thing that I'm realizing more and more is even though I'm American, I've lived in the UK for 8 to 9 years, I'm really realizing that my experience eventually is going to be the Black British experience. Because I've made home here. Mm-hmm. And I think that it is really complicated. And I'm on a journey of what it means, to be authentically Black, authentically queer, and authentically Christian. Still keeping my, I would say my probably still identifies charismatic evangelical roots very much. Mm-hmm. So I would say being a queer Christian, I think is just generally just hard for lots of people. Worrying about when they go into a church, are they going to accept them, things like that. But then you have the Black element that a lot of people who are, global majority people that live in the UK come from a more conservative ideology that doesn't always affirm LGBT plus people, or sometimes even see LGBT plus people as a white thing. I was speaking at a school recently, and a girl, she was 17, and she goes, "Are you gay because you've been hanging out with too many white people?" This is and her friends didn't go. It was like, yeah, probably. So because we live in these silos in the UK, I know most of my white friends, they've never, like, besides me, they've never been into a Black person's house or been to a Black church or something like that, or really did that. So though it's a multicultural country, we still live in we're not a salad bowl, as people say in America, but we're really, dishes on that you can pick and choose from.
Do you think that's more pronounced in the UK, in your experience, than in the US, or not?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes, I think so. As well as there's deep bedded racism within the gay community, within the LGBT community, hugely that I never really expected until I really came out. And we can't expect somehow, if there's huge racism in the LGBT plus community, we can't expect that all of a sudden the LGBT plus Christian community to be any different. So embedded in it, I'm like, oh, this is quite interesting. On a regular basis, I'm the only Black queer person that I see on a regular basis. When you go into places that have, I live in Manchester, we have the Village, which is a huge, thriving place. I'm always the only Black person.
Really? Wow.
Always the only Black person.
That's a very lonely place to be, isn't it, actually? You know,
oh, absolutely.
And if you've also got some homophobia coming, I mean, homophobia exists in white communities too, let's not lie. But if you've got homophobia coming from one side, you've got racism coming from the other side of your identity, it's kind of really a lonely place to be in the middle there sometimes.
So yeah, so then you know, my church is majority white. So I go to my church, and it's affirming. It's a wonderful, beautiful church, St. James Emmanuel. But I'm still going to be the only Black person. I go to the village, and yeah, there's going to be other queer people. And my rugby team has 120 people, and there's 3 Black people on the
Rugby
team.
league or rugby union?
Union. And it, so I'm always the only one there. You know, if I'm rarely, unfortunately, because of my day-to-day stuff, rarely with Black people, only Black people. But like when I'm with only Black people, it's this worry of like, can I be my authentic self of being queer? Or is that going to be, you know, really weird? So I'm never really ever in a circle where it's like, I can fully be, you know, myself. And I think the only way I deal with that is I have this understanding that Jesus came to earth and was never truly comfortable here. And that feeling of being uncomfortableness on earth is helping me to, one, want to destroy the colonial empire of that structures that exist on earth. You know, I believe in life before death, but there's also this yearning for something better later. So I think that helps me. That's kind of how I connect and deal with my struggle of where do I fit in, really, in that aspect.
No, that's really interesting. And I guess, like, I remember watching something, don't ask me who it was, but they had celebrities that were Black and they were interviewing them about things and that on this program I watched a while back. And I just remember there was one person who traveled to the Caribbean, and they just said that when they traveled then back to the UK, it was like they physically felt the stress of like having to re-enter racist society just piling up on their shoulders. Like they just felt really tense again. And when you're talking about the kind of intersectional experience of being Black and queer, I wonder if that's something which it would be really hard to balance, because in a place like Jamaica, you would probably also feel extremely uncomfortable being gay. So then you kind of,
yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like you'd feel uncomfortable with this weight. And I don't think a lot of white people realize how heavy that weight is to carry of racism in the UK and in other, you know, white majority countries. Also,
what's really awkward, and good progressive white people and within the church, one thing that they don't realize is when you talk about, you know, especially, for instance, in my case, the Anglican Church of England, the reason why we can't be more progressive is because they say the Africans are holding us back. That's what we say, right? The Africans are holding us back. And be really careful about how you say that, because it can become quite anti-Black in that. Interesting enough, with Inclusive Church, I'm very blessed that because I come from a more evangelical background, people from more evangelical churches that are moving to a more inclusive theology of all different types of things speak to me that they wouldn't speak to other people about. And interestingly, one of the hardest things is not the inclusive stuff about LGBT plus people, but actually it's about race. So for instance, my church, love my church to death. But my church is way harder for them to get around the race issue than around the sexuality issue. For instance, you know, we have these lovely paintings of these white saints everywhere. And I was like, I feel really quite uncomfortable with that. And they're like, well, this is what we always had, so we're going to keep them. Like, shut down conversation. Now, if I said, actually, you know, we have a marriage book. Now, in Church of England, as you know, we can't do same-sex marriages, but our church does alternative services for people. So I won't get in trouble. alternative services for people. But the book had all heterosexual people on there. And people were like, no, they literally ripped it up and started a brand new thing.
Yeah.
Like that. So it's fascinating. It's very
But they don't see it as the same kind of thing. Maybe it's just in some ways ingrained more, maybe.
Yeah. As well as, interesting enough, once I joined staff team, more Afro-Caribbean people joined the church.
Yeah, of course.
Knowing it's an inclusive church as well.
Mm.
This one woman, I mean, I love it. I love this woman. She's because you probably know that in this country, Black folks, everyone who's older than you is auntie and uncle. That's kind of a cultural thing. And I said, how are you doing, auntie? She goes, calls me father, even though that's not our tradition at all. We don't go by father and mother. But she goes, oh, how you doing, father? And I'm like, good, auntie. And she goes, no, the Lord bless you with a man yet. a nice husband. And I said, no. I was like, no, auntie. She goes, well, I will be praying. I'll be praying for you. And I'm like, thank you, auntie. This is an 85-year-old Nigerian Anglican.
Mm.
And it's like I was blown away. I was just like, I had to sit there and be like, did she really just ask me that?
Mm.
I'm like, maybe her eyes are bad, and she thought I was a woman, but it was it was not like she called me father, so it couldn't be. So it's
I doubt it. Yeah, I think that we just actually assume things about people, and it's these kinds of prejudices and these kinds of stereotypes, and when we talk about, like you say, the African church holding the Anglican church back or whatever, well, that's already a little bit racist, because African countries are all very different on the LGBT kind of, do you know what I mean? In terms of LGBT rights, there are some countries that are much, much more progressive. There are some countries like South Africa that got a marriage. I mean, yes, they've got still homophobia in society, but some countries are much, much more progressive than other countries. And so you're kind of tarring the entirety of Africa anyway with the same brush, which is already a little bit racist.
And also it's this awkward thing, so I truly want, inclusion globally, without a doubt. Don't get me wrong, I do. But also people have to understand, if you live in northern Nigeria, and there's some people in Coventry saying we want to make the agenda about us being able to get married, and there's people in northern Nigeria who are, the Boko Haram is killing them and bombing their cities. I'm not devaluing the couple that want to get married, but they have to understand, actually, intense poverty, intense colonialism, intense war and famine, like Maslow hierarchy of needs, that is larger the African church. That's what they're kind of worried about. And as well as and obviously I'm not saying we shouldn't be more progressive, but also when you live in an area that is half Christian, half Muslim, and you have a more progressive view, then you can often get attacked and killed in some of the areas. So it's so it's crazy.
Complicated. It's complicated, isn't it? And it's not like there's not white majority countries that aren't really homophobic, like Russia. I mean, exactly. And actually, like I tell people, kind of, a lot of people will look at a Pentecostal church and that's the majority Black and go, oh, they're not very gay friendly and stuff. But you look at the denomination of the Pentecostal church in question, and it's actually run by all entirely white people. So they're the ones laying down the law about being homophobic. So I mean, sometimes you've got to dig a bit more, and for sure we definitely put people in boxes, and we assume that people are not going to be open-minded or whatever.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So that kind of leads me to another question, actually. So I've got here, what are the stereotypes which society holds and which most harm people of colour, and specifically queer people of colour, do you think? I've jumped a question.
Say the question again.
I've jumped a question which might have confused you. So I've gone to this one because I thought it led on quite nicely. I've said, what are the stereotypes which society holds and which most harm people of colour, and specifically queer people of colour, do you think? The stereotypes.
I think one of the biggest stereotypes is that we don't exist. I think that's one of the big things. I think one thing is really harmful is unconsciously, how do I say this? One thing that's really difficult is thinking you're colorblind when you're not, and also not evaluating what your sense of beauty is. So in America, for instance, I remember I was back home and I got to meet with some of the bishops in the Episcopal Church, and I said, who do you think the most marginalized person, what's the most dangerous person it is to live in America? And they said, a trans woman of color. And my cousin was killed by a man as a trans woman of color, and really, really, really hard. And my family never really spoke about it. And I think that it is that nature of never really feeling like you're home. Never feel like you're ever really in a safe space to be you. So I think for me, when it comes to identity, I think that's what one thing it is. I think that makes it really difficult. I think with stereotypes, I guess the ones we do finally get to see is the ones who it's usually male centric, and it's usually quite on in society quite a feminine, Black or Asian men, but it doesn't give the whole spectrum of gender and sex or expression of how you are a queer person. So I'll say those things, if that makes sense, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. So you think there's a problem with representation? Well, of course there is, because you probably only get token representation, really. And when the less people you have representing a community, the more stereotypical it's going to be, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that someone asked me, "Oh, you're a queer vicar. Why aren't you connected to more?" Now, I think part of it is churchmanship. I think when it comes to with Anglicans, the queer ministers tend to be more Anglo-Catholic, so high church. They tend to be very white. They tend to be quite independent school. So basically, they're kind of the empire builders, but just has to be queer as well. So because I'm not that, I don't get invited to those parties and to those events, where some of my other friends who would fit more of that does get invited to it. But it can be, I have a friend in Jarrell Robinson Brown who's amazing, and it's been amazing just to journey with him for the last 2 to 3 years. And we're both, but we're both now in the Church of England. So I think friends are really, really big. It's really, really big. Having friends that you can confide in, that you can speak to, you can pray with, is really, really important, because it is lonely. It is incredibly, incredibly lonely. Yeah.
That's really wonderful as well that you said that as soon as you went on staff team at Emmanuel Church, because you're at Emmanuel Church in Manchester, in case people didn't know that, I've not really said that and we haven't really mentioned it, I don't think, but with Nick Bundock there and others. And when you joined staff team, more Black people came along to church. I think that's really, really interesting and really important. And it makes me wonder if maybe at that place they said was all white, maybe it would have not been all white if you joined, you know.
Yeah.
And I think Emmanuel itself has been on a big journey in terms of inclusion since the beginning with Lizzie Lowe and that tragedy of Lizzie, you know, taking her own life and that. And then Nick told me that not only then when they became inclusive of LGBT people, did LGBT people start coming, but loads of other groups started coming that were kind of minority groups, like refugee groups and all sorts of different people. So I think it is really interesting.
One of the biggest lies that you can learn is when your church becomes inclusive, it decreases and then dies, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
But you can grow an inclusive church. And it's obviously hard, and you know, I will easily say that we are in a affluent area of Manchester. We are a low church as well, so I definitely understand those dynamics without a doubt. And we're also obviously Anglican. So, but you know, our church looks very different than it did before the inclusion journey. We have between 300 and 400 people attending every weekend, and you know, people from we baptized 22 Iranian men the other week, you know, and you know, this ex-Muslim Iranian man is sitting next to a woman with dementia, next to an adult with a learning disability, next to a lesbian couple that just got married a couple weeks ago. It's beautiful, and they're all in the same home group. And it's like, where else does that happen other than the gospel of Jesus Christ? It is beautiful. It is a beautiful, like, yeah, we did Racial Justice Sunday a couple weeks ago, and around the table, we had all different tribes, all different, you know, languages. And yeah, it takes a lot of planning. It can be sometimes really difficult, but it is an absolute foretaste of the kingdom of God and what we're going to experience for eternity. It's amazing.
And have you heard about the, because you mentioned about how you can grow as an inclusive church, and have you come across the research done by the Methodist Church, actually, which shows that it is one of the essential factors in terms of growing a church is to be inclusive, actually?
No, I did not see that. Wow.
Yeah, that's what they came back with. They did a study of I think churches in the northeast of England, I think it was. And one of the things they all had in common, the growing churches, was that they were inclusive. There were other things, you know, like I think they focused on small groups and things like that, and making sure people had pastoral care. But that was one of the things. So it's really interesting. And I think that actually people think maybe you can't do both. But it's not only a gospel imperative, it's actually sensible. It's actually a good thing to do for the future of your church as well, you know.
Yeah. My favorite when I go and do I do some outreach stuff in the community, so my job is minister for students outreach and engagement at St. James Emmanuel Didsbury. And when people, you know, tell me different things about, oh, you know, I don't really like Christianity because it's like anti-gay, I'm like, well, I mean, I'm gay. I understand. They're like, wait, what? Like, yeah, you're a gay vicar? Yeah. Wait, what? And then, oh, can I go to your church? I'm like, yeah, sure, you can come to my church. I'm like, do you have a boyfriend? He goes, no, I'm straight, but I mean, you know,
you see? So especially with the younger generations, it's the only way actually to win them back, any of them, really. They're just never going to come back to church. I mean, people say, yes, there's big anti-gay churches with lots of younger people in them, but really the majority of younger people don't want to be going to anti-gay churches. And quite often when you interview the people in anti-gay churches, they're not there. They don't really agree with the main line. They actually are only there because they like the worship or their friends go there. You know, you actually find out that they don't agree with the homophobic stance. So I mean, it's just a win-win situation. It's a no-brainer. Yeah. Cool. Well, where are we getting to? Yeah. Ooh, we've nearly had, I think, well, we started a bit, recording a bit after the time that we said. So I think we've probably had about 40 minutes, maybe 50 minutes now. So let's move on. And I've got another question here. So why do you think it's important? I mean, you've probably answered this a lot, but why do you think it's so important to do theology from the perspective of race and sexuality, gender, etc., intersectional perspectives?
Doing theology intersectionally is important because it's good exegesis. Because the people of the Bible, the people Jesus is speaking to, everyone, it comes from a context and comes from relational understandings that is their day-to-day lived experience. Therefore, we have to come at theology, understanding God and understanding God's word in light of people's lived experiences. And how do we then preach? How do we teach? And then how do we come up with solutions to the world's problems by understanding the context in which we are in? I think it's really, really quite important. It's important because, by telling, when I read the Psalms and I, reading, Psalm 109, and it's, oh, woe is me, Lord, my enemies are doing this. It's like, yes, I know how that feels, because I know how it feels to be in, to experience all this quite bad racism. Last weekend, I was out for my birthday, and someone called me the N-word in a queue, and that just like took me back. When the psalmist says like, oh, I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to like follow you, Lord, but everyone's kind of like just piling on me. That's a bad paraphrase, but just like whatever. Last week on Thursday, we were working with university students, and the head of that campus UCCF chapter told me, because of my views about LGBT people, I'm not allowed to even be in the event, not to go watch it. So I was the only one that wasn't there, and I was excluded. That exclusion I feel. And how do we, in order to win people, and be, I think Paul, there's different types of talking to people about Jesus, but Paul, argued in the streets. But in order to explain the gospel, explain the story, this beautiful story that we have as the gospel, then we have to understand where people are coming from. We have to understand their lived experience. And intersectionality is really important to understanding how we communicate and how we pastorally care for people.
And after all, the story in the Bible, really, the thread in the Bible is the story of a minority people. It's not the story of a majority powerful group of people. So that's why we get all these beautiful passages that we identify with when we're marginalized.
Yeah. So right now our church is going through, our evening congregation is going through the Minor Prophets. And it's so funny. One of the sixth formers who comes, he goes, I'm feeling like, not everything, but I'm feeling like week after week it's the same thing. I go, what do you mean? He goes, God cares for the marginalized. God, and he really gets upset for people who persecute people who are marginalized. And he goes, literally every week for the last like month, that's been the sermon like action plan. I go, yep. And I'm like, I choose the sermon series for a reason. So then it's not me saying it, you're just reading it in the text.
Yeah.
Over and over and over and over. So yeah, and it's amazing.
God is really repetitive in the Bible. When you said that, I thought you were going to say, and that was just like, we weren't even preaching. That was just him listening to the Bible readings for each story. It's true though, isn't it, to a certain extent, We make it, we spiritualize it a lot. That's how I think powerful people have got away from the true message of the Bible, is through spiritualizing everything, so they don't have to actually look at the political message anymore, and the message that God says to marginalized and poor people.
Oh, absolutely. I had a meeting with a friend, and he said this. I think it's really great. He says, people teach the gospel with no spirit because they want a gospel with no liberation. The spirit brings freedom, and the spirit brings true liberation. And it's true, and it was so interesting that he said that yesterday in our conversation. I was like, I really like that, because it's true. The gospel brings liberation to all people.
Write it down.
Stuck in the bondage of this society, bondage of sin, and also the bondage of structures of inequality.
Yes, this is one of the things that is making me really passionate at the minute, is the fact that when we teach theology in whether it's in universities or colleges or anywhere, we make liberation theologies, in the plural, like feminist theology, Black theology, Latin American liberation theology, queer theology, etc., disability theology. We make them marginal. We marginalize the marginalized theologies, and yet, like you say, they're the absolute core, because the gospel is about liberation. So liberation theologies should be the center and the thread through everything.
Very true.
So that should be our aim as a church, is to make that the center of all of our theological education. That's what I think. Anyway, It's not about me. I'm interviewing you. So maybe to kind of let's start. We're probably done nearly an hour. So let's just go on to the last final questions about resources and people that inspire you, or activists or writers that you admire, podcasts, books that you recommend, that kind of thing. If you've got anything to put out there. You did mention Cornel West, who I've also read a little bit for my degree, and he's really good writer. So that's somebody that we could put out there. But if you've got anyone else you want to recommend, or any books?
Yeah, I have a couple. 1 second. So I would really recommend Kelly Brown Douglas. Anything from Kelly Brown Douglas. I would recommend a book I'm reading currently right now. It's called, let me make sure that I say it correctly. Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? That is by MLK. Really, really amazing. James Cone, The Cross and the Lynching Tree. Obviously really amazing. And I believe and Cornel West as well.
Yeah, The Cross and the Lynching Tree is an absolutely powerful, amazing book. I've just finished my dissertation for my MA on the cross and liberation theologies, and that was quite a central part of it as well.
Yeah,
because he does make that link between Black people's experience especially on the lynching trees, and Jesus's experience on the cross, which, amazingly, I don't think anyone had actually made that link before James Cone.
Yeah,
it now seems obvious, doesn't it? But
I'd also say a person that's probably slightly easier to read than those would probably be Tony Compolo. So I'm American. I really rate a lot of probably more progressive Protestant traditions in America. They have quite a lot of not saying that the UK doesn't, but they just have a lot more rich resources in the US than often they do in the UK, because it's kind of dominated by the Church of England so much is in the UK. But it had really Tony Compolo is a Baptist minister. He's getting quite old now, but he's at Eastern University, which is a Baptist, a pretty progressive Baptist institution. Yeah.
And he had a kind of coming out for the gays, as it were, didn't he? At some point. I think his wife was always supportive pretty much throughout. But he had a kind of turning around moment, didn't he, where he started to support LGBT rights. And
yeah, I think with a lot of things with evangelicalism, once you started supporting LGBT people, a lot of things, you lose a lot of speaking engagement and things like that. So it can be quite scary. So I think for him, he did it. I think he was supportive privately for a while and then publicly.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing, isn't it? Is that it takes risk, and the reason it takes risk is, because you've still got the powerful dictating and all that. And yeah, you often do take risks to do the right thing. So sometimes that's a sign that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been really, really lovely to talk to you, Augustine. Say your name again, because I'm saying it in a British way.
No, it's fine. Augustine.
Augustine. Okay. Augustine. Yeah, sometimes American English and British English are we have slightly different ways of saying things. So
yeah.
Anyway.
Well, if you ever want to listen to Switchfoot, Switchfoot, and put Augustine and listen to that song. That's how you can know my name, because that's where first.
Okay.
Yeah, they say it very American.
That's
Augustine.
where everybody now that's listening to this is now going to go. Google that.
They're going to hate it. They're going to absolutely hate it.
Okay. Oh, it's been brilliant talking to you. If you think of anything else, let me know on an email. Anything you want people to check out, look at, read, and I'll remember to put it on the video when I share it. Okay. Cool. Brilliant. I will stop recording now, but it's been absolutely lovely to meet you.
Thank you. Cool.